All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change.
Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a little bit about ourselves along the way. My name's Abu.
And I'm Opsa.
And Opsa, we are kicking off season 3 of this podcast.
Yes, we are. So exciting.
It is incredibly exciting. We have an amazing schedule ahead of us. For folks who may not already be aware. If you want to know what we're reading, when we're reading it, check out the show notes. We have the entire season 3 schedule laid out. We're going to be covering some great sci-fi books. We're going to be covering some upcoming sci-fi movies, maybe sprinkle in some TV show coverage as well, just like we did last season. It should be an incredibly fun season, and I hope folks are excited to join us, and I hope they'll be reading along with us. I will say, we are starting season 3 on a very dark, a very good, very impressive, but very dark note with our first book, Parable of the Sower. Heavy is the right word, exactly. Yeah. Today we're going to be covering the first 13 chapters, roughly the first half of Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
And just a light content warning, this book, as we said, covers some really dark subject matter that not all listeners will be comfortable hearing about. So be warned and definitely make sure the kids aren't in the car. Yeah,
definitely. We're going to be getting into some heavy stuff because this book touches on some heavy stuff and goes to some really dark places, as we'll get into. But before we dive into the pages of this book, as always, we want to encourage you, dear listener, to read along with us and share your thoughts with us. So email us at sci-fi-bookclubpod@loreparty.com and join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi-bookclubpod. We post free reading guides over on Patreon. We post discussion questions alongside every episode, as well as bonus clips and bloopers. The Patreon is also where you can find the link to join our free Discord to keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going with all of the fellow readers in our lovely little community. So check all of those links out in the show notes.
All right. The game plan for today is the same as for nearly every episode here. We'll start out by summarizing the chapters from today's reading, the first 13. Then we'll share our first impressions, maybe some predictions. And finally, we'll wrap up by diving deep into our sci-fi analysis. Let's take a quick break and we'll get into today's reading.
Are you feeling more fulfilled now that you're back to work? This Friday.
No. I need a vacation.
See the movie that critics are saying is an awesome,
Look at that.
crowd-pleasing, fist-pumping, all-out brawl of a film.
You're right about that.
They're coming after our family. Go fix this.
Oh, my.
Nobody 2, rated R, only in theaters Friday.
Today in McDonaldland News, Mount McDonaldland is experiencing thick volcanic shake activity. So try the new Mount McDonaldland shake when you order the McDonaldland meal with your very own character souvenir kit.
A McDonald's, in McDonaldland, get the McDonaldland meal in McDonaldland.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome back, folks. Let's begin, as always, with a quick summary of the assigned reading for today's episode. Today, we have to cover 13 whole chapters, Opsa. So consider this a very quick refresher. We're assuming you have read these 13 chapters. We're just going to jog your memory in case it's been a bit.
That's right.
So, Parable of the Sower. This is a story that is framed as the writings of our main character, Lauren Olamina. The whole book takes place from July 2024 to October 2027, and the story is told through these journal entries by Lauren. The opening chapters start in 2024, In these chapters, we're introduced to the setting, right? We are introduced to 15-year-old Lauren, who lives with her father, her stepmother, and 4 younger half-brothers in Robledo, which is a small town outside of LA in this walled-off community. Through Lauren's writings, we start to get a sense of the world that she inhabits, right?
Yeah.
We learn that, for example, a combination of the climate crisis, economic turmoil, corruption, rampant poverty and drug use means that Lauren lives in a really dreary and dangerous world where the outlook is grim and folks are really just getting by. We also learn that Lauren is a hyper empath. She feels others' pain and pleasure as if it were her own. And this, it's made pretty clear to us, goes beyond just normal human empathy, right? You or I, Obsa, might look at somebody who is injured and sympathize with them and perhaps even imagine what they may be feeling. For Lauren, it's an overwhelming feeling of sharing that pain. What she sees happen to another person feels like is happening to her as well.
Right.
Now, throughout these opening chapters, we also get a very strong sense of who Lauren is as a person. She's clearly very intelligent and ambitious, and we start to learn about this new spiritual belief system that she has been formulating. She's been writing her thoughts down for years.
Yeah.
And what will become known as Earthseed begins here in her journals. This belief system centered around the idea that God is change. She, in fact, writes in her diary about how it's her dream, and in fact, her vision for the future of humanity, to live among the stars, to leave Earth, and travel into outer space, despite literally everyone around her, including the president of the country and her father, believing that space exploration is a huge waste of time and resources, given the dire straits here on Earth. Things are bad enough on the ground. Why would we try to go into outer space?
Right. Well, moving on to the second year and kind of the second part of this first 13 chapters, we continue to follow Lauren as she journals about the world around her and the collapse of the community that she is a member of. You know, she writes about the deaths of numerous community members and the tragedies that she's a firsthand witness to. Some pretty strong themes and clear dangers become apparent here. There's gun violence, theft, arson, all sorts of sexual victimization that are revealed in the incidents that we encounter in these chapters, from the death of an elderly, to be fair, racist neighbor, Mrs. Sims. Certainly not applauding that. Very sad. but also still sad, still very sad. But also to the accidental fire set by, honestly, the really tragic 3-year-old Amy Dunn. The Dunn family, honestly, really tough to read about. Had to definitely take some pauses. And in the end, gun violence also tragically takes her life.
Literally a stray bullet that penetrates the wall, right? Like it wasn't even intentional gun violence, or there wasn't a robbery incident. Literally, out of the blue, a bullet penetrates the wall and hits Amy Dunn and takes the life of this 3-year-old.
Yeah.
It's really tragic stuff. It was tough to read about.
Totally. And she's obviously also a victim of kind of generational trauma, and her story, and really the entire Dunn family, is really amongst the most painful that we hear in these opening chapters. Lauren is, of course, totally heartbroken by Amy's death, but is also galvanized to action, and it firms up her resolve. And it leads her to eventually opening up to her best friend, Joanna, to try to encourage her to think about this grim future ahead of them. She tries to prepare Joanna to take on the mantle of responsibility. You know, things are bad and they're not getting better. And it's best to be prepared. It's time to be preparing for this kind of imminent disaster that they're facing. Unfortunately, like many of the grown-ups in the community, Joanne is willfully ignorant about how bad things are and how much worse they can get. And eventually tattles on Lauren to
Yo,
to her
this
family.
is a tough look for our girl.
Come on, best friend, what happened? Oh, Joanne.
Oh, gosh.
Lauren's dad, of course, reprimands her for, in his words, spreading panic about these doomsday scenarios, which is interesting because we come to understand that her father is also making his own preparations.
That's right. I'll have more to say about that in my takeaway. Now, in the next couple of chapters, from chapters 7 through 9, we learn about what turns out to be an utterly tragic 2025 for the Olamina family, thanks to Lauren's young, headstrong, rebellious brother, Keith,
All right.
who leaves the community. He goes outside of the gate, outside of this walled community, taking on the risks of life out beyond the wall. And he comes back a couple of times. The first time he gets in trouble, his father beats him. It's not enough. Nothing is enough to shame Keith into staying home. He continues to go out beyond the wall, get into God knows what trouble, and to come back with money, with more guns, and it's certainly shaping his attitude. And Lauren is seeing all of this in a kind of an interesting dual light. On one level, she's extremely hurt by what Keith is doing to the family, right? He's tearing this family apart with his actions. He's terrifying his mother and father. Corey, her stepmother, is like constantly in tears that she's going to lose her baby boy. Also happens to be her favorite child.
That's right.
I mean, youngest child privilege. I could go on about that, but I'll just leave that there. But I think what's also interesting is that Lauren is also seeing Keith leaving the wall as an opportunity for her to learn about what it's like on the other side of this wall she has only rarely ever gone out of.
Right.
And so these journal entries I found really interesting because it's clear that Lauren, as much as she's hurt by what her brother's doing, a little part of her is also really intrigued.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And in 2026, we continue to follow Lauren. She's now 17, and things are continuing to deteriorate. Keith has been, of course, revealing bit by bit a little bit more to Lauren about what he's been up to, and it's nothing short of harrowing. He's been robbing, he's probably been killing, and he's taken up community with a gang. A community is a weird way of putting it, but he has
It's a really gentle way of putting it, Jose, but I appreciate it.
Let's call it protective detail. I don't know, but he has effectively joined a gang that has really only taken him in because he can read and write, which is, these are rare skills, unfortunately, in the world of Parable.
That's right.
What becomes amongst the kind of shortest and saddest entries of the entire book, August 26th, 2026, in Lauren's diary entry, she writes, "Today, my parents had to go downtown and identify the body of my brother Keith."
Oh.
So it's obviously devastating for them all, but it is in fact Keith's body they find at the morgue.
That's right. That entry hits like a truck because it comes in the middle of a chapter, like in the middle of a very normal-ish chapter, right? And it's so sudden. And it's just one small sentence by Lauren on August 26th, 2026. And then you see that there's a huge gap between this entry and the next entry.
That's right.
Where clearly the family is grieving, Lauren is grieving. She's unable to write anything in her journal. It's really effective storytelling. I think the framing of the book as journal entries really made this death hit like a gut punch.
Yeah, very personal. I mean, that's the kind of powerful device that we have here. Like journaling does feel so personal and kind of firsthand as we follow Lauren's journey. So we feel this death very viscerally. Yeah. And the rest of 2026 isn't really any better. It's really a downward spiral from there for the Olamina family and the broader Robledo community. Things are starting to break apart at the seams, as Lauren had predicted. Some of the residents are considering life outside in this kind of company town, including Lauren's friend Joanne. And some of them do, in fact, take up the offer to join and trade effectively their freedom, their liberty for safety.
Yeah.
And at this point, Lauren decides that when she turns 18 next year, she's going to leave. She's going to head north and seek a better life and better opportunities than what seems to be available in Robledo. And she's got quite a strong view on this. As the year ends, tragedy unfortunately strikes again. Lauren's father goes missing.
Oh my God.
And his body isn't found. They send out search parties, but this pillar of the community, really one of the most kind of stable elements in Lauren's life and the community at large, is suddenly gone.
And gone long enough that he's no longer missing, to be clear.
Right.
Gone long enough that nobody makes it this long on the outside. He's dead.
Right. Lauren eventually tells her boyfriend Curtis of her intentions to head north in the following year as things continue to spiral into chaos. And it's at this point that we encounter one of the kind of ever-present dangers, the pyros, the pyromaniacs, the paints. And we see a neighbor's house burn down, killing his entire family. Lauren's house is robbed. And as the year wraps up for them, they're barely making ends meet. Corey, Lauren's stepmother, is somehow able to take over her husband's role, but they're just barely getting by. And by the end of the first 13 chapters here, the community is on the edge of collapse.
Yeah. It's just so tragic and so sad. It's a really tough read.
Yeah, you really feel for these characters, and that's honestly one of the most powerful things about Butler's writing in these first 13 chapters is you get really clear portraits of each of the members in the community. And yeah, as you said, you're rooting for them, you're cheering for them, and hoping that they can continue to be a community.
Yeah, that's what you hope for. But like you said, by the end of these first 13 chapters, we seem to be teetering on the edge of collapse at this point. Personally for the Olaminas, and widely for the Robledo community as well.
That's right.
Well, that covers the first half of the book. That's a quick refresher and summary of those first 13 chapters. How are you feeling so far about the book, Opsa? What are your impressions so far?
Yeah, I mean, so much to say about this. I mean, to say the least, I love this book. It's searing, poetic, haunting, visceral, just so powerful. And it's both hard to put down and sometimes hard to pick back up because of how painful and just tragic and real so much of it is. And
yeah,
it's challenging to sum up my thoughts given not only how much happens, but, as we said, the richness of the characters we meet. And there's also just the dark, dystopian, trippy, but ultimately recognizable future that we see that Octavia Butler is able to paint here. And it being so familiar in some ways, familiar and unfamiliar in other ways, of course, it's kind of a damning indictment of our present time. I don't find that this book so diverges from the 2025 and 2026 that we know that I can think of it as far-fetched or exaggerated in any kind of way. And that's kind of what's so horrifying as we're reading these first 13 chapters is there's a real sense of almost deja vu that you kind of encounter as you're reading these chapters. So just so much more to say, but yeah, how about you? What are your kind of first impressions and your thoughts as you're sinking into this book?
I completely agree with you. This is an incredibly tough read, especially as a human being living in the year 2025. All of this just feels so close to home in a way that is deeply uncomfortable. And a little bit later on in the episode, we're going to talk about Octavia Butler and the publication of this book in 1993, by the way. Yeah. So the fact that Butler predicted this decades ahead of time just feels so prophetic. I am loving this book. Like, full transparency, both you and I have read the entire book so far. Obviously, we're not going to go past chapter 13 today, but I love this book so much.
Totally. Somehow
Butler has completely captured what it feels like to be in America today, right now.
Yeah.
Ultimately, here's my take. This is required reading. I think every high school in the country, every high school in the world should be
Totally.
required to read this book and understand the themes and ideas that Butler is exploring here, because they are just so urgent. These are the things we should have been talking about a decade ago, but now that we're here in 2025, we absolutely must be talking about in order to avoid living in the same world that Lauren does. Because it really does feel like we're hurtling toward that grim future. You said it in your impressions as well, but like, it feels so similar. It feels so close to home. Everything in this novel, right? The ravaging of the climate.
Check.
The country's economic decline. The country's political decline. Clearly, America is far lower on the political stage in Lauren's universe than it perhaps was back in 1993 when Butler wrote it. And in some ways, like, you could argue we're already there, right? Like, there's the proposed NASA funding cuts, speaking of space exploration and deprioritizing
cutting of the funding to the Department of Education. Like,
absolutely, yep, exactly.
Actually seeing failures of our civil institutions.
Exactly. There's also other ideas in the book that have just kind of always been part of the American fabric, for better or worse, mostly for worse. I mean, racism, classism, corporate exploitation, all of those things are present within this novel and are deeply entrenched in American society and have been for a long time. None of that is new, but I think what's new in this novel is that Butler is saying, this is what happens when these things go unchecked. When society begins to fall apart, how these things go unchecked and the damage they can do.
Yeah, it's structurally interesting. The first half of this book very much reads like, this is the horrifying future. This is the problem.
Yeah.
If we let our complacency go unchallenged, essentially. And to your points, I mean, there's in fact a quote that I really liked about kindred, but I think applies equally as well here from Octavia Butler. She writes, I wanted to write a novel that would make others feel the history, the pain and fear that Black people have had to live through in order to endure. And I think that is exactly what happens in these first 13 chapters. She truly makes us feel what happens when we collectively fail to address the social and climate problems of our day. And that's the picture that we essentially encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really appreciate is that the issues in the story are structural, right? Even the folks with the best of intentions will face the same dangers that the folks with the worst of intentions outside the wall. You know, this lovely community, as you put it, that Keith joined outside the wall. They are facing the same dangers that Lauren is facing, even though Lauren has never killed anybody. Lauren is trying to live a peaceful and prosperous life, but it doesn't matter. When the structure and the society collapse happens, it affects everyone equally. And so I really liked that as well. It's not that there's one racist antagonist causing all the problems. It's not that there's one climate disaster incident that wrecked everything.
Right.
These are large structural, institutional issues and cracks in the foundation that have now become such a problem that no one is safe. Joanne isn't safe. Lauren isn't safe. Keith, Lauren's father, both of them felt the consequences. One of them of his own actions, the other totally randomly, right? Like the fact that Lauren's father died so quickly after Keith's, to me, I think is intentional. It's the contrast between one person of the family felt the repercussions of his actions, of his dangerous choices, of his immoral choices. The other member of the family, what fault was Lauren's father at? All he did was go to work and come back. And somewhere along the way, he was clearly attacked and killed. Everyone is equally harmed when these institutions fall apart, when these systems and societies fall apart. So I really appreciated that there's no one cause or there's no easy to point to answer to what has caused this or who's at fault.
Yeah, it's essentially the kind of gradual decline of society and the systems that we take for granted.
Absolutely. I want to wrap up on just by saying a little something about Lauren. I'll have more to say about Lauren in my takeaway later, but I just really like Lauren. I don't know how you feel about her as our main voice and our main protagonist, the person who's telling us this story, but I just really find myself identifying with Lauren.
Yeah.
She really honestly reminds me of myself in some ways as a teenager. Some of my own personal struggles as a teenager, particularly faith, has been something that I've always bounced around on and struggled with, and I'm still coming to terms with. Family and community expectations and interpersonal relationships, like those have always been sort of a stress point in my life as well. And I get it, like every time Lauren writes something, I'm like, yo, I get it, Lauren, girl.
Yeah.
I get it. Of course, over the course of our coverage of this book, we're going to talk a lot about Earthseed.
Yeah.
I haven't even said anything about religion or the themes of religion in this book yet. Like, my God, there's so much in this book.
Totally.
But all I'll say very quickly is consider me a believer.
Yeah.
I love the idea of Earthseed. If someone had told me this when I was young and impressionable, I fully 100% would have converted to this religion. I think God as the concept of change is such a compelling idea. I also really appreciate that this is a belief system that's just rooted in reality. It's rooted in adaptability and taking self-responsibility. Like Lauren is really onto something, but you can tell that her belief system is also such a reaction to the world in which she was born.
Absolutely.
She in her world, there is no space to waffle. There is no there is no forgiveness for mistakes. Like there is no easy way. And so her religion is very realistic, straightforward, and on the nose in that way. Yeah. Which I just really, really appreciate it. So I'm really loving Lauren as a character. I really identify with her. And that's just been a huge part of my enjoyment of this book.
We'll definitely have to do like a large retrospective on Earthseed as we kind of finish our coverage of the two halves of this book. But it's such an interesting philosophy. It really, even in these first 13 chapters, becomes this survival guide, survival manual for Lauren. And you can see how what she writes about as the verses of Earthseed also reflects what's happening to her contemporaneously. There's kind of so much about this philosophy that is both personal, but also, kind of goes beyond the realms of the individual. And it's really quite inspiring for those reasons.
It is. I think inspiring is the perfect word. All right, so that's a recap of the first 13 chapters and our initial thoughts and impressions of the book so far. Let's take a quick break, OPSA. But, dear listener, don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're getting into our sci-fi analysis. We're going to talk about the meta, a brief history of Octavia Butler's career and the publication of this book, and then some takeaways. Stick around, we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
All right, welcome back, listeners. As always, let's get into a little bit of the meta. Let's talk about the book's publication, its author, Octavia E. Butler, and learn a little bit about the history behind this incredible novel.
That's right. I always find this so illustrative. I think it gives me such perspective on a book, knowing how it came together.
Totally.
So let's talk Parable. Parable of the Sower was published in 1993, as we said earlier, and it became the New York Times 1994 Notable Book of the Year. In fact, in a 1994 review written by Gerald Jones in the New York Times, Gerald writes, quote, "As a novel, Parable of the Sower also succeeds on multiple levels. A gripping tale of survival and a poignant account of growing up sane in a disintegrating world. It is at bottom a subtle and disturbing exposition of the gospel according to Lauren. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. End quote. A glowing and positive review of the book from the New York Times. On the flip side, I wanted to try and find a harsher review of the book, and I did, in a 1993 Kirkus review, which is a bit more critical. Quote, a vanishingly thin plot and dreadfully preachy, imperfections for which Butler's usual virtues, lucid prose, a realistic progression of events, and splendid texture, unfortunately fail to compensate. End quote. Okay, I disagree, but okay, Kirkus.
Yep. Sure.
Sure. I like that even within the criticism, there's praise for Butler's incredible writing, which, of course, you must acknowledge.
Totally. You'd almost want to see an updated review from this writer.
Yeah, it is really interesting to now look at contemporary reviews written in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Because really reading this book in 2025 is a whole different experience than it must have been reading it in 1994.
What's also kind of interesting about when this book was published, 1993, is that it was just 3 years after the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released their first assessment report on climate change, which indicated human activities were substantially contributing to global warming and climate change. It was also published at the height of the U.S. crack epidemic, which saw increased crime and violence in inner city neighborhoods. So in light of that, you can see that Butler wasn't telling a tale of some kind of far-off, imaginary dystopia, but extrapolating from real historical patterns that were present even then.
Yeah, absolutely. And are present to this day. Kind of makes you sad to consider perhaps how far we've come and how far we haven't come.
Yeah, totally.
In all those years. Well, the book has actually had a resurgence of popularity in the last decade or so, as readers have started to note the eerie parallels to our real world, something you and I were chatting about just a few minutes ago. In fact, in 2020, the book made the New York Times bestseller list for the first time ever since its publication.
Shocking.
That's amazing. Well, for what it's worth, Parable of the Sower is not Butler's most awarded novel. It wasn't exactly winning her Hugos and Nebulas left and right, but it was nominated for a Nebula, and it won second place at the Locus Awards in 1995. So it's not like this book wasn't getting recognition for its quality.
Totally.
And in fact, the sequel to this book, Parable of the Talents, would actually go on to win the Nebula in 2000. So clearly, Butler's at the top of her game here and writing some of the best stories in sci-fi.
Totally. And on Octavia, that's Octavia Estelle Butler, Octavia E. Butler. She was born in Pasadena in 1947 to working class parents. Her father died when she was only 7, and she was raised by her mother and grandmother. We know from some of her writing that she was a pretty shy and lonely student who struggled with dyslexia, but loved spending time in the library.
Girl, same.
Yeah, likewise. She loved reading science fiction magazines and knew she wanted to write science fiction after seeing the 1954 film Devil Girl from Mars, a movie so bad that she was convinced that she just must be able to write something better.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Gotta love that. She ended up graduating from Pasadena City College in 1968 and continued taking classes at the nearby CSU and UCLA. And she actually had a chance to take a class with the science fiction legend Harlan Ellison, who became a mentor to her and encouraged her to attend the famous Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop.
That's right.
She found some early success with her short stories, but struggled to get a novel sold until Pattern Master was published in 1976 by publisher Doubleday. And just 2 years later, she was able to quit her numerous odd jobs and go all in full-time as a writer,
Hell yeah.
releasing the now iconic stories Kindred, Wildseed, and of course, the Parable novels. Mm-hmm. She wrote dozens of short stories, essays, and novels during her career and tragically passed away too soon at age 58 in 2006. A little unclear of the cause there, but it appears to have been a stroke or perhaps a head injury caused by a fall. But Over her illustrious career, Butler was able to win numerous awards for her incredible writing, and in 1995 actually became the only science fiction writer to receive the MacArthur Genius Grant.
Yo,
which
what a flex.
is dope, honestly. Just 2 years after the publishing of this novel. Her stories have been awarded and nominated for, as we pointed out, various Hugos and Nebulas, and in 2010, she was actually posthumously inducted into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame in Kansas.
Nice.
In fact, NASA has continued to honor Butler over the years, naming both a mountain on one of Pluto's moons, as well as the Mars rover landing site after her.
Amazing.
Her legacy as a pioneer in science fiction continues to inspire writers today, podcasters as well, as you can tell.
That's right. That's true.
And there are numerous adaptations of her stories in production, including an adaptation of Parable of the Sower by A24.
I, for one, have my fingers crossed that we see this adaptation by A24 someday.
Likewise.
All right, so that's the meta. That's a bit about the book's publication and about Octavia Butler's incredible and inspiring career. Let's now dive into our takeaways and dig deeper into some of the themes and ideas in the first half of this novel. Opsa, I'll hand the mic to you first. What's your big takeaway for today?
Yeah, we've definitely touched on this already, but I think it's such a present component of the novel that I definitely want to do a further deep dive into it. And what I basically want to explore is something that has kind of haunted me about these first 13 chapters. It's how Butler is able to construct effectively an architecture of collapse, and in so doing, warn us about the dangers of comfortable denial, of unchecked complacency. In these first 13 chapters, we've said it, we encounter some really horrifying and dark failures of society. But what's notable to me is that it's more mundane than it is fantastical, right?
Yes.
We're so accustomed in science fiction to alien invasions, nuclear wars, these other really grandiose and maybe imaginable, but certainly fantastical catastrophes that lead to civilizational collapse. But in this novel, it's not quite that. It's the quiet failure of everything we expect to work. Police and civil services become unreliable. Insurance companies don't pay out. Fire, our oldest tool, is now a symbol of imminent and ever-present danger. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and that's part of what makes it so terrifying and plausible, I think, to us kind of modern readers. What kind of caught my attention, even right at the very beginning, was this opening dream sequence with Lauren and Corey, where they're discussing stars versus city lights. On the surface, it's just kind of simple preference. Do you want natural beauty or the comfort of civilization? But a layer below that, Butler is showing us two really quite radically different relationships to reality. Lauren, of course, chooses the stars, the honest, unfiltered truth of what's actually there. Corey chooses city lights, the reassuring glow of human systems, even if they are artificial, even if they block out deeper truths.
And the safety of the known, the lights and the city she knows, versus the exploration of the unknown, the stars that we've never been to.
Totally. Which is a recurring theme with the adults in Robledo. Because they have a past that they can remember, they cling to it. Whereas Lauren and the other youth of her generation neither have a future that they can look forward to, nor a past that they can pine after.
Yeah, beautifully said.
And the truth is that both responses here are understandable. You can't really hold it against the adults, against Corey, that they seek comfort and security in what they know and what grounds them. And on the other hand, what's fascinating and ironic is that Lauren's later ultimate goal for Earthseed is to take root among the stars. The very thing that Corey dismisses as free but worthless becomes, for Lauren, a vision for humanity, one that fuels her drive and gives her a direction and offers a kind of a perspective and a point of view that's more hopeful than it is pessimistic.
Yeah, completely.
And I think this ultimately connects to what, to me, strikes me as maybe the book's most urgent theme, which is the lethal, kind of fatal nature of comforting denial. Ultimately, Butler does take a stance here through Lauren, our narrator. The adults in Robledo are, according to Lauren, anchored in the past, waiting for the good old days to come back. But we come to learn those days aren't coming back. They've created these elaborate ways to achieve psychological safety, their walls, their routines, the prayers.
Yeah.
And rather than confronting how fundamentally their world has changed, they seek comfort in those defenses. And while we may not hold it against them, it's clear that either Butler or Lauren does here, certainly.
Definitely. Lauren is downright venomous in some of these journal entries when she's particularly frustrated with the adults. Yeah,
totally. But I to be fair to them, their denial is completely rational given what they're facing. When Joanna tells Lauren, "We can't do anything," she's not wrong. No individual neighborhood can reverse climate change or fix the institutional collapse that they're facing. But the problem, I think, with that worldview and that kind of rational helplessness is that it leads to paralysis and inaction. And that is the rousing call that Lauren, and I think by extension, Octavia Butler, is trying to enact. Yeah. As Lauren puts it with really brutal clarity, if you really believe nothing can be done, then, well, let's kill ourselves now and be done with it.
Oh. She's not wrong.
It's brutal, but it's kind of the splash of water that it seems so many of them need to hear.
Yeah.
And ultimately for Lauren, it's clear that God has changed and Earthseed aren't just these spiritual ideas. They're an argument that the only way to survive or prevent systemic collapse is to develop what's for her almost kind of built in, this radical empathy and adaptive consciousness. And most importantly, to take action. It's for me here where Butler's applied ethics is coming through and is made more clear. She is calling us to see the patterns in front of us, to accept the uncomfortable truths, and then to change course before it's too late. At the heart of Earthseed is not the worship of change, but a call to shape it.
Yeah. And I don't think within the Earthseed creed, there's any idea of helplessness or that change happens to you and that you are powerless in the face of it. In fact, I think as you're stating, Lauren's intentions with Earthseed and the gospel there is the opposite. Change is an inevitable part of nature, yes, but you have a hand in it. In fact, you are empowered to shape it, mold it, and react to it.
Right.
And within that power is how you shape your destiny and your life and the future itself. It's a powerful message.
Totally. Yeah, Butler published this book in 1993, and as we've said, she wasn't writing about some far-off future that was unimaginable. She saw these problems and patterns clearly already in her present, and 30 years later, things haven't significantly improved. I think in so much of our science fiction, there's a future that's portrayed that feels so optimistic as to be almost more fantasy than scientific, extrapolation. But Butler had clear eyes. She saw around her the crack epidemic. She saw institutional decay, climate collapse, corporate power. And that's, I think, part of what makes Parable feel so prescient. It's not just her uncanny foresight, but her willingness to take seriously in her present what others might choose to ignore.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's the most urgent message for us now. Collapse isn't something that happens to other people in other times. It happens slowly, quietly, here and all around us, hidden away behind our psychological walls. The question isn't whether we'll face crisis, it's whether we'll develop the will to see it clearly and respond with wisdom rather than denial.
Bars. Bars, I hope so.
Butler, preach.
That's true. In fact, oh my goodness. Wow, what a great takeaway. You're absolutely spot on. I think that is core. That is the heart of this book. This idea that denial in the face of change is one of the most dangerous decisions you can make.
Right.
And that change and danger and perhaps even societal collapse are inevitable in some ways, but it is up to us to decide how we react to that change and how we choose to mold it and shape it. But the first step to molding and shaping it is at first removing denial and acknowledging that this is happening. Yeah. And I love this takeaway, Hope. So this is so important to the story of this book. Lauren is one of the few people in this community that maybe is willing to acknowledge the true dangers of the world they live in and is willing to acknowledge that it will take some difficult decisions to overcome the inevitable.
Yeah. Speaking of Lauren, I know you have a lot to say about her. She is the vehicle through which we come to kind of understand this this narrative and this philosophy. And one wonders why it is that she seems to be such a powerfully aware representative of the collapse of society. And perhaps you could shed some light on that for us.
Yes. Yeah. I'm excited to get into my takeaway because what I wanted to look at is Lauren as the narrator of this story, but in particular, I want to hone in on the ways that she can sometimes be an unreliable narrator. She can be somewhat unreliable in recounting the lives of the Robledo community or the events that occur with her family. And I found that really interesting because, to be honest, on my first read through of the book, I didn't consider this at all. I just took every word on the page as the truth. And it's really only something that dawned on me on my second read through of the book as I was taking notes and preparing for our episode today. I began to realize that this entire book, this entire glimpse of the dystopian future that we're given is through the thoughts and feelings of a 15-year-old teenager.
True.
And I don't say that to disparage teenagers, right? But what I'm trying to really get at is just think back on how you were as a teenager, dear listener, or how you were, Opsa, as a teenager. God. You don't have to disclose anything if you don't want to. But
don't love looking back at that.
And I feel like most of us don't. Most of us that have matured into adulthood probably look back at our teenage years and cringe a little at the way we felt or the way we did things,
Yeah.
At that age, your emotions are so heightened. Your world, frankly, is quite small. So everything feels so important when in fact, it is small in the larger context of things. And many of us, myself included, I'll admit to this, I was arrogant as fuck. I thought I knew everything. I thought I understood the world better than every adult in my life.
Totally.
And if some of that sounds like Lauren to you, that's intentional. She is a teenager. And the stroke of brilliance here in the writing from Butler is that she captures that teenage attitude and those teenage emotions.
Yeah.
While still giving us an incredibly intelligent and endearing protagonist and narrator to experience this story through. And to be clear, let's face the facts. The entire framing of this novel as journal entries is inherently subjective, right?
So yeah,
no word on the page can we accept as objective truth.
Right.
Because it is a journal entry. Lauren chooses what to record and chooses how to frame it in each entry.
Totally.
Perhaps she's omitting some doubts or failures or some contradictions to present a more coherent retelling of events, right? She's writing these things down after they happen as she recalls them. There's no way we can accept every word on the page as objective truth and objective fact. All of it is filtered through Lauren's lens and memories and the way that she is shaping her telling of the story.
Right.
Not all of that is nefarious, right? Some of that is just natural subjectivity that happens when a 15-year-old person journals.
Right.
But I want to dig into some examples. So really the main example that really stuck out to me in these first 13 chapters is that scene where Lauren is discussing with Joanne and is talking about, the walls won't protect us forever, and
Right.
we have to be ready for the worst. We have to prepare. We have to train everyone
Right.
in the community.
Right.
We have to bury valuables in the yard and have go packs ready to go in case it all goes to shit. Really scaring Joanne here.
Yeah, she goes full doomsday prepper at this point.
Full doomsday,
She basically has a bunker. She's like, oh, we're getting ready for this, okay? Get your canned milk, Totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look, I get it. Like, Lauren's urgency here reminds me of a lot of the impatience I felt as a teenager. Like, I was constantly frustrated by my inability to, like, make changes in my life. I was constantly wanting to control how others behaved because if you'll recall, I was an arrogant little asshole and I knew better than everybody.
Yeah.
And, along those same lines, like, I constantly as a teenager was like, am I the only one that sees this? I get it and nobody else does. We see a lot of that here in Lauren's interactions with Joanne. And what I loved is then we have this flipped on its head. Because once Joanne, frankly, breaks best friend code and tattletales, Lauren then gets reprimanded by her father. And here is where we realize that Lauren's father has already been burying valuables in the yard. Quote, "Now come out back with me. There are some important things buried in the yard in sealed containers. It's time for you to know where they are just in case." End quote. Lauren's father also recognizes the reality of where they live and the world they live in, and has been preparing in much the way that Lauren wants everyone to do. And this is where it became clear to me that, like, oh, we don't know the full picture. We are seeing things through Lauren's lens. And you mentioned this in your takeaway, but Lauren writes often in these journal entries about how frustrated she is by the adults around her, right? Particularly by the adults' inaction in the face of what she sees as inevitable. These walls are coming down, folks. We can't just pretend we'll live here forever. But I think this interaction with her father and other small interactions throughout these chapters indicate that she isn't giving the adults enough credit. They are out here doing their best, and they know what's at stake. They have some things holding them back, certainly, as you pointed out, right? They still have perhaps 1 foot or half a foot planted in the past, but they aren't utterly clueless in the way that Lauren sometimes paints them out to be.
True.
I also wanted to talk just briefly about how Lauren's journal entries and her interpretation of events in this story are also colored by 2 really important parts of her life. Her spiritual conviction, her belief in Earthseed, really colors her perspective here, but also her hyperempathy. She feels things, particularly pain, so much more deeply than the average person.
Right.
And that certainly shapes the way that she views the world around her as well, and also shapes the way that she views members of the community. The thing that kind of stuck out to me on a second read was we never once hear about one of her father's sermons. Never once does she journal about them. But I got the sense that she attends them regularly. It's sort of a thing most of the community does. She's the pastor's daughter. She at least has to show face every now and then.
That's right.
But it's not important enough to her to actually write down in her journal anything her father says or anything that happens at church.
Right.
Because again,
That's
for her,
interesting.
Earthseed is her church. Earthseed is her belief system. Her father's God is not her God, which she makes very clear from like literally page 1 of this book.
Yeah.
And I think that does lead to her being somewhat dismissive of other people's belief system. There was a quote about Mrs. Sims after Mrs. Sims died by suicide that I think is a good example of this. Quote, "She believed, like Dad, that if you kill yourself, you go to hell and burn forever. She believed in a literal acceptance of everything in the Bible. Yet when things got to be too much for her, she decided to trade pain for eternal pain in the hereafter." How could she do that? Did she really believe in anything at all? Was it all hypocrisy? Or maybe she just went crazy because her God was demanding too much of her. End quote. You can see that she, like Lauren is processing the death of a community member, but also quite sort of like dismissive and critical.
Totally. It's not, love Lauren, not the best look in this moment.
It's not a great look. Yeah.
Certainly reminds you how young she is. And really, she hasn't gone through enough tragedy or personal pain to appreciate that this is a tragedy. This isn't kind of a thing to be critiqued in terms of the kind of religious hypocrisy. It's really a kind of a sad and tragic end to this elderly woman.
That's right. And I don't want to critique Earthseed because obviously I'm an ardent believer in the Earthseed philosophy and religion. But one could argue, perhaps, that Earthseed is just as demanding as any other religion, perhaps more so, because it is so focused on survival.
Yeah.
But for Lauren, that's not demanding. That's not too much. She sees Earthseed, her belief and her philosophy, as practicality, as a necessity. This is just what has to be done. So I believe in it, and other people should as well. So I think that there also shows us a bit of her bias when it comes to spiritual matters within the community.
Right.
Just some interesting things I noted. To wrap up my takeaway, though, I don't want to just dog on Lauren the whole time, because I think Lauren's age also works in her favor in many, many ways. You touched on this in your takeaway, so I'll briefly go through this, but her frustrations with the adults aren't completely unfounded. As a young person, she has only ever seen her world in decline. She doesn't have those rose-colored glasses about the good old days. She never saw the good old days.
Right. They think that they can make Robledo great again. And simply... That's simply not going to happen.
God. Yeah. Sometimes you have to accept that there is no greatness to go back to. And, this snowball has snowballed way too far. It's not turning back into snow anymore.
Yeah.
And, for what it's worth, like, Lauren's bleak outlook helps her shape Earthseed, of course, as we've discussed.
Right.
But also lets her confront the reality of the world better than the parents can. And I think this is even more important, believe in a future for generations to come that can be different. That isn't tied to a past. We're not trying to, Lauren's not trying to get back to a past that was good. She's trying to move to a new forward that is better than where we are now. And I think that distinction is kind of her superpower, honestly. It's what sets her apart from the parents.
Yeah, totally.
And I do think it takes a certain level of like teenage naivete to like believe so wholeheartedly that can happen. Totally. I don't imagine that a jaded adult would be so passionately committed to an unknown path forward despite the difficulty, so passionately committed to a new way forward, because they would have seen too much. Their life experiences would have almost dulled their ability to dream.
Yeah.
Lauren is still kind of at that age where she can look at the stars. She can't hear a story on the radio about an astronaut and go, that's possible. We can do it.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but pretty universal that as we age, as we get older, we become more conservative, less willing to take risks, less willing to hope or to dare. And to your point, maybe it's the teenage naivete that is necessary to really chart a different path forward.
I think it is. I think Butler is making the case for that, certainly, through the lens of Lauren's worldview in these journal entries. And here's where I want to end my takeaway and wrap up. Ultimately, I am not trying to make the case that Lauren is an unreliable narrator and that we can't believe anything she journals about. I don't think that at all. On the contrary, I actually think Lauren is, quite impressively reflective and intelligent and self-aware for a 15-year-old. Certainly more impressive than I was as a fucking 15-year-old.
Yeah, same.
And
the forgotten
I do
years,
think
the dark ages.
The dark ages, for real. And I do think in these journal entries, she is documenting events as accurately as she possibly can.
Yeah, totally.
And so at face value, I do accept them as the events that took place. I don't think she is maliciously lying in any of these journal entries.
Right.
And I think sort of stepping out of the story from a narrative perspective, from a storytelling perspective, I really love this framing device, telling this story through these journal entries, because I think Butler is inviting us as the readers to reflect on this very thing, to reflect on how someone's belief or lack thereof, someone's personal trauma, someone's hopes can really construct their reality for them. This is Lauren's reality that we are experiencing, and that comes packaged with all of Lauren's beliefs and trauma and hopes for the future. And I think Butler is asking us to do the same, to consider this story, but also how each and every person out there shapes their own reality based on their own experiences, much as Lauren is doing in this story. So, big fan of the framing, big fan of Lauren, and I don't know if it's clear, but big fan of Octavia Butler.
Yeah, preach it, Boo. I love that takeaway. I mean, it's so interesting because I will admit, I definitely so identify with Lauren, or at least am so caught up in her point of view that as a reader, I forget to kind of remember to challenge that, to remember that the narrator is but one voice in the kind of telling of the events. And it makes me kind of wonder now, how would this story play out if we were reading the journal entries of her father, or of Corey, or Keith for that matter? You know, we have to, I mean, I think Keith is maybe properly or improperly maligned in the novel, in Lauren's kind of telling of the story. But we have to remember, Keith is a young man in a world that offers him no hope or opportunity for furthering himself or achieving anything that one might consider ambitious, you know, and ultimately we do only have the one perspective here. So it makes you wonder, you know, like what would this look like? It's kind of, as you say, it's a phenomenal device for this novel. It's almost like found footage, you know, like you could almost think like if you removed the binding and you just had the kind of journal entries and you've just stumbled upon them, this would be the most harrowing. And, you know, I mean, it's journal entries. I mean, it could be something that a future historian finds and thinks, oh, well, this totally makes sense. This is, in fact, a journal entry from somebody, you know, living in these times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so well written and so expertly crafted.
Yeah.
It's incredible, you know, what Butler has achieved with the book.
Totally.
Well, so that's the first 13 chapters of the book, the first half. Folks, we have homework for you, though. We still have another half of this book left to go.
That's right.
Buckle up. Here's your homework for the next episode. Finish the rest of the book. Easy peasy. Just read the second half of Peril of the Sower, get to the end, because in the next episode of Science Fiction Book Club episode, you and I are going to be talking about the back half of the book and the book at large, and giving it our final, very official Science Fiction Book Club ratings. And of course, like I said up top, you can find our entire season's reading schedule in the show notes below. Just click on that link down there. It'll take you to the whole schedule. And that way you can read along with us. You'll know what the due dates are, what chapters we're reading, and when you have to have them read by. We have the whole schedule filled out for the next 6 months, folks. So lock in.
That's right.
It's going to be a great season 3, and I can't wait.
Indeed. Well, friends, remember, belief initiates and guides action, or it does nothing. So take action and leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to continuing our discussion of part 2 with you next episode.